Hello everyone and welcome back. So I just saw Ready Player One, directed by Steven Spielberg, and it sucks. It's so bad. I was honestly shocked at how miserable I was during this movie. I went in, to be fair, with fairly low expectations. I saw the trailers and I said, okay, it's gonna be a pretty by-the-numbers Steven Spielberg movie with way too many references.
Come with me.
This is the Oasis. It's a place where the limits of reality are your own imagination. People come to the Oasis for all the things they can do, but they stay because of all the things they can be.
And that's almost exactly what it is, except much worse. But before I unload all my frustrations about this movie, let's go over a couple of positives, because there is some silver lining to this movie, albeit not that much. For one, of course, it's a Steven Spielberg movie, and like all Steven Spielberg movies, there's a great look to this movie. Not necessarily the cinematography is great here, but just the look. The visual effects and the color palette, the color grading, all of that is great. The movie looks really nice. Like, there's never a shot or a frame of this movie that was visually unappealing. Another thing I enjoyed about this movie were the performances. I think Tye Sheridan is really great in the lead role. Ben Mendelsohn as the villain is good for the most part. And everyone else in the movie does a fine to serviceable job. So the performances here are pretty decent. That's about it. Coming out of this movie, I was chatting with one of my friends who saw this movie with me, and we kind of talked about why the movie was so miserable, because I could not believe how miserable it was. And he brought up the good point that this movie is about 45 minutes too long. The runtime of this movie is 2 hours and 20 minutes, and that is just too long. That runtime is so bloated, I can't even quite express how much padding and filler is in this movie, which is the biggest issue with it, honestly. If this was a more concise runtime, like a nice 90-minute hero's journey runtime, like most hero's journey movies are, a la Kubo and the Two Strings, I may have been more forgiving on this movie, but since it takes it almost an hour longer than it needs to be, I'm gonna come down pretty hard on this movie. For one, the first half of this movie is borderline unwatchable, and that is mainly to do with the fact that I would say 90% of it is just animated. We open with Tye Sheridan talking about this virtual reality Oasis thing, and then he goes inside of it, and then from then on he's like wandering around. There's this introduction to our main characters. They have this big elaborate race sequence that goes on for 15 minutes, and then there's some more walking around, and then he comes out of the Oasis only to walk around in the real world and then go back in it again. So the biggest issue, I think, with the first half of this movie is that it's just not interesting. And it's so heavily animated that it's kind of shocking to me. When I watch a movie, there's something called stakes that I constantly look for, where you feel something for the main characters, you feel worried for the main characters, there's something at stake. But here there just isn't. The bad guy, played by Ben Mendelsohn, doesn't do anything for a solid hour. He just talks about how when he wins this contest, where if he gets this Easter egg inside of the game, he inherits the company, the Oasis company, and then a whole bunch of money. And he says, once we get the company, we're just gonna put a whole bunch of microtransactions in the game, and it will be amazing. So his character for the first half was just greedy businessman, but they kept trying to portray him as like some evil guy. Like the main girl in this movie, I think her name is Olivia Cooke or something Cooke, I don't know. But she at one point says to our main character, Tye Sheridan,
This isn't just a game. I'm talking about actual life and death stuff.
and I was like, what? You never showed that. When was it established in this movie that there are actual consequences? Because so far there hasn't been any, and we're an hour in. So that's confusing. So another weird thing about the first half of this movie is that our main characters have to find 3 keys to find the ultimate Easter egg that will let them inherit the company and $500 billion. So they're looking for these keys scattered throughout elaborate puzzles or elaborate games, So they get the first key in this racing game in the first 30 minutes or so, and the way that they get it is that Tye Sheridan figures out that if he drives backwards on the racing game, then a platform will open, and he can just drive through the course backwards underneath it. So he can just bypass all the course and then just go to the finish line. But the movie takes place 5 years after the death of the creator of the Oasis, who established the point of the Easter egg 5 years ago when he died. He said, if you find the Easter egg, you get the company. Now it's 5 years ago. And when Tye Sheridan drove backwards off this course, I immediately thought of Mario Kart, where there's some players that will literally just drive backwards immediately. And that happens in almost every game. So why hasn't this happened for 5 years? Why haven't 15,000 people got the first key already? Because so many people are just trolls and they just want to drive backwards. So how haven't they figured that out yet? Which establishes one thing that is very weird about this movie. The fact that it's set 5 years after the contest officially started. So when we get introduced to this world, we see that Ben Mendelsohn is running this company called IOI, I think. And he has like hundreds of employees that are constantly working around the clock to try and figure out the game, trying to figure out how to get the Easter egg so his company can get all the money. The fact that it's set 5 years after when the game started brings up another problem for me, where I feel like a company like this would have either exhausted its resources just dumping money into trying figuring this out, or they would have given up, or of course figured it out. So when it established that they're still going constantly, that they're trying and trying endlessly, I couldn't help but think, wouldn't it work better if we watch the movie, the first 20 minutes is establishing the Oasis, just like it did with our characters, and then the creator dies in the movie, like while we're watching. So the contest is established while we're watching it, and then the companies start to get involved and try and rush to win. And so everything feels a little bit more urgent. But here, since it's set 5 years after the contest started, it feels very weird on how the company's still going and they haven't just given up. Like, if you're gonna set it 5 years after the contest started, then it would be kind of nice to see maybe the company said, screw this, we're done with this, we're gonna move on and try and make money somewhere else. And then when the guy gets the first key, then they start just dumping resources into it again. But it's just not that way. And I think the reason for this is just that Steven Spielberg says don't think about it. And I think that's the ultimate thing with Ready Player One, is that you should just not think about it. Because if you do, then it kind of completely falls on its face.
Wait. You don't tell anyone who you are. You can't use your real name. Hold on to something. This isn't just a game. I'm talking about actual life and death stuff.
What's going on?
Just practicing my Mario Kart!
Especially because this is just a hero's journey story, which has been done 100 million times. Disney does it, DreamWorks does it, everyone does it. Everyone puts it in all their movies, which makes the story amazingly predictable. So when you have this predictable story, you kind of need to throw things in there to make it interesting, like cool visual effects, which I guess this movie has, or great characters that really drive the plot forward, or a seething villain that you can really get to hate, or stakes, like world-ending stakes, like Pacific Rim or something like that. And this movie just doesn't have any of that. There's no world-ending stakes. The biggest stakes that come in the second half, and it's just that, oh, the company's gonna get the Oasis, and that's a bad thing? And then there's no characters at all in this movie. They're all just flatline, boring, cliched characters. And then there's no, the visuals for the most part are okay, but they're kind of used to service the ultimate theme of the movie, which is just a nostalgia trip. I know I said that the bloated runtime is the problem, and that is, but my personal vendetta against this movie comes in the fact that it is just a nostalgia trip. And that's all it is. All the movie tries to be is to just shove in as many references to other things as it possibly can. And at some point during the movie, it gets so overbearing and obnoxious that I just wanted to leave the theater because I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take this movie pretending to not be a movie. All the movie accomplishes is just throwing references on the screen and hoping that you catch one of them and latch onto that. And then just say, I love the movie because I saw this thing that I love in it. Some of the dialogue gets so ham-fisted in this movie that it's comically bad. There's a line where, there's multiple lines where characters will say something and then say, oh, that's from this game, or oh, I know this from this movie. And then they basically look right at the camera because they're making a reference and hoping that somebody in the audience gets it. And it gets so out of hand that there are chunks, just entire chunks of this movie that are just nostalgic trips. There's a scene where the main characters go into the Shining world as part of one of the puzzles to get the key, and they're running through like the hedge maze, and there's the zombie lady from room 237, and the hotel doors are opening and blood spilling out, and it doesn't serve any purpose. It's just, oh, look at this reference we could put in the movie. And it's so obnoxious, especially the Shining scene, because I, for one, think that Stanley Kubrick is the greatest director ever, and that The Shining is the greatest horror movie ever, and then Ready Player One just uses it as a nostalgic trip to try and appeal to people like me that love the movie. And it feels so cynical and so misplaced in a children's fantasy, a family movie. There's no child on Earth that would get this reference. Why is it even in this movie? I don't understand. The whole point of it is to just say, remember this thing that you like? Look, the elevator doors are opening and there's blood, and oh, there's this creepy lady in room 237, and now she's got an axe and she's trying to kill this guy, and then, oh, he's in the hedge maze, he's getting chased by Jack Nicholson, and then that scene's just over, and then they're actually gonna continue on to where they're supposed to be, which doesn't involve that at all. It's just a nostalgic trip. Just pull that out of the movie! Just pull all that bullshit out of the movie, because it's so bloated because of stuff like that. It's so frustrating. It's so infuriating to talk about this movie because there are so many just huge chunks that can just be pulled out of the movie and it wouldn't make any difference. The only reason they're in there is to try and appeal to stupid fanboys of things. Oh, God, I hate this movie so much. I keep saying that the first half is the worst, but the second half doesn't get much better. The second half actually does establish some stakes and consequences when Ben Mendelsohn blows up Tye Sheridan's stack that he lives in, his like trailer that he lives in, and his family dies. And then you say, okay, now he's a bad guy, and now I have a reason to root for our main characters. And then there's an actual story that takes place where he has to gather the forces to beat the bad guy. And I was like, why wasn't this the movie? Why couldn't we just have this be the movie? Why do we have to go through an hour of references to get here? Oh my God, I hate this movie, man.
Ask yourself, are you willing to fight?
But even though it has a structure in the second half, it's still not very good because, again, the characters are terrible in this movie, so you don't care about their struggle at all. But of course, in the vein of the hero's journey movies, our hero rallies the troops behind him, they beat the bad guy, he gets the oasis, and then everyone's happy. The police come and take Ben Mendelsohn away and say, you're a bad guy. But that leads me into one thing that confused me about this movie, and maybe someone can help me with this, but I just did not understand the world. There are many points in this movie where it shows shots of people on the streets with the VR goggles on, like punching and hitting, and it made me burst out laughing because I just don't believe it for a second. I don't buy it. I don't buy the fact that there are people just on the street playing VR games. A, why aren't you in your home? Or B, why aren't you just in like an old car like Tye Sheridan was? Why are you just in the middle of the street or on a sidewalk? It's so weird to me. And then the fact that it just is pushing the fact that everyone plays this game, I don't buy that either. There's not all that many people that are glued to their phone constantly. There's some people, sure, and there's some people that play games and are glued to that, but not everyone is to either. So why are you insisting in this movie that almost every person on the planet plays this stupid game that's basically just VR chat.
We leave our world, but we don't leave our world. We don't have to walk 5 feet to leave our world. We just have to put something over our eyes.
This is the way. We must go on a search, brother, to find out.
In here.
Lead us.
And of course, there are little logistical things that I don't understand, like how the company has all these unlimited resources and we don't ever learn what they actually do. They have like drones that go around that are just like endless, that can track anything or anyone anywhere, and then can put bombs on things and blow stuff up without any repercussions. Like the cops never get involved. And at first I thought, are there cops? But then they show up at the end, so there definitely are. So where were they when this stack got blown up by the big bad corporate guy and people knew that it was him? Why didn't the cops take him away then? And what do they do? That was my biggest question, is what does IOI actually do in this universe? All it seems like they do is just try to solve the Oasis contest. That's it. That's all that they're ever shown doing. But it's stuff like that that bothers me. I want to know the world. I want to get into the world. I want to be immersed in the world that you create. And Steven Spielberg just blatantly doesn't do that. This movie feels like it's 6 hours long, and that's the most disappointing part, is that there is so much to this movie. There's so many grandiose visuals, there's so many sweeping camera movements and references to old things and amazing visual effects, and it all just feels like it's at the service of nothing. The story is beyond predictable, and it doesn't even start until like an hour in, and the first hour is just miserable. There's nothing that happens, and the small things that do happen in between endless padding and endless filler that just throws and shoves references down your throat to no end. And that's not a good thing. I know a lot of people love their references, but it's so overbearing here. It's overbearing to the point where it makes this movie unwatchable. So I'd probably give it a 3 out of 10. I just despise it. So yeah, I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Oh.